the basics done over and over again consistently is what makes and separates the brokers, the mediocre brokers, from the really great brokers.
Welcome to the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. I'm your host, Axel Ragnarsson, and on this show, I dissect how seasoned multifamily investors started, built, and scaled their businesses. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. In this week's episode, I'm chatting with Taylor Avakian, who is a young multifamily broker living in Los Angeles, operating in Los Angeles, doing deals in LA. And in this episode, we dive into how brokers can actually start their businesses and succeed, and really what it takes to succeed as a multifamily broker in a competitive market. And it is a really, really tough business to find success in. So we talk all about Taylor's story, how he got into the brokerage business, how he got his business off the ground and started to find some success and start actually making money as a multifamily broker. And we also talk about how investors can build great relationships with brokers in their local market. And this is a great conversation to have with Taylor because he's on the other side of that coin, and he shares traits of investors that he actually enjoys working with and that he has great relationships with. We also talk about LA multifamily, Los Angeles multifamily, which was a great conversation because it became a conversation around markets that are supply constrained and that aren't necessarily discussed in the broader kind of podcast universe or really in the multifamily community that much. Everybody in multifamily seemingly wants to be in the Southeast, the Southwest, in Texas, but there aren't really a lot of folks who are investing in the Northeast, Northwest, West Coast, Midwest or Upper Midwest. So we talk about the case for investing in those types of markets. We talk about how those markets can be supply constrained, which is actually very advantageous for multifamily investors. So this is a great episode that is a little bit different than what I normally do on the podcast, where I'm usually speaking with active investors. But I did want to have a conversation with an active multifamily broker who has found success in one of the most competitive markets. And I think this is going to be an episode that resonates with a lot of multifamily investors and also folks that might want to get into brokerage as well. So if you haven't already, please leave the podcast a rating and review, as it helps the show get noticed by more folks. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please do that as well. That way you get each new episode queued up right in your podcast feed of choice. But again, thank you for listening to the show, and let's get to this week's episode with Taylor Avakian. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode here on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. Joining me this week is a young broker out of LA, a hustler, somebody who's getting after it, building a really cool business. Taylor Avakian is joining us on the show today. How are we doing, Taylor?
I'm doing very well, Axel. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me on.
Absolutely. It's not often that I'm chatting with brokers on the show. Usually it's folks that are financing real estate, raising capital, or, for multifamily, raising capital for multifamily, operating multifamily. We have had some brokers on in the past. And usually I'd like to bring folks on who are in the brokerage role that are operating in competitive markets, right? Because there's a different approach there. And you kind of have to be playing at a higher level in order to compete in the larger markets. Obviously you being in LA, that's the case. LA is obviously, one of the most competitive markets in the country. But why don't we talk about your story, how you found real estate, maybe what you were doing before that, and what your business looks like today?
Yeah, absolutely. So real estate kind of found me, I guess you could say. So I was very competitive growing up, playing sports. Since I was 2 years old, I played soccer and transitioned into different sports, football, baseball, ended up being pretty competitive at baseball. And so we had some travel teams and I would play basically all year round. A couple of the parents who had kids on that team were in real estate. Some of them were developers, some of them were brokers, and a few of them became really good family friends of ours. And so I kind of got to see from that they were always at their kids' games, which that was the first thing that I was like, oh, cool. Like their dads are at their games, and that's pretty awesome. Then once I started getting older, going in high school, we started hanging out outside of the baseball stuff, going to their houses, seeing, I'm from Sacramento. So we would go up to Tahoe and a few of them would have Tahoe homes. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. They got a lake house, and then they got a cool boat, and then they got a nice watch on, and they're looking a really cool Range Rover and whatever it was. I was a little bit infatuated with that lifestyle, and it was something that kind of drove me to look further into what they were doing, and found out that they were in real estate. And one of my mentors, a good friend, family friend, friend of my dad's, I was like, hey, he was a developer. I was like, hey, I want to do development. And he's like, okay, that's cool. But you really should learn real estate first. You can't just like jump in and start developing 100-unit apartment buildings. You could, but it's a little bit harder. He's like, hey, look, go be a broker, understand the business, meet your people, like get a good base. And if you want to go do development, once you have an understanding, then you can go do development. But you need to understand real estate more. And he wasn't like he was looking for people to come on and mentor underneath him at that time. And so I told myself, all right, well, let's give this real estate thing a try. So in school, I studied finance, because the first year I was there, some guy in the, like one of my, the guy who takes care of the floor, the VA, or I forget what it's called, but, he basically told me, he's like, if I had to do it all over again, he was graduating. He's like, I would just do finance degree. And I was like, that sounds okay. Yeah, sure. If you would have done finance, I guess I'll do finance. So I decided to do a finance degree. And then there was a real estate minor at my school, which I went to the University of Alabama, and was like, all right, cool. So I guess we'll do some real estate stuff. We'll do some finance stuff. And whatever happens after that, I'll just make a choice. So ended up going through school. At the time, sidebar, was trying to be a professional CrossFitter because I couldn't get that competitiveness out of me. Did that for a couple years, and then was making videos on YouTube actually, when I was in college. And so after I graduated school, I went home to live with my parents, and this was in 2018. And I was like, I'm going to give this YouTube thing a shot. Like, give me 6 months. Let me make as many videos as I can. Let me try to create some content and see if I could build this into a, business where I can make money. Long story short, wasn't able to make that into a business. I did decently well, and I learned a ton. Like, I made videos every single day for 3 months in a row, 90 videos. It was intense. It was really intense.
What were you creating content about? Was it CrossFit related or something else?
It was like fitness, and then it kind of got into comedy stuff, and then it was like kind of doing what that age group was doing. I was just kind of going with the crowds. I didn't find my niche yet. And 6 months came, summertime, and I was like, look, I gotta get a job. Let's recheck out this real estate thing. So I ended up contacting my friends' dads, my family friends. I was like, hey, I want to do this real estate thing. Can you get me some interviews? I want to go live in Southern California. So they said, yeah, sure. Like, we're happy to go and do that. Came down to San Diego, interviewed at a couple shops, some private equity shops, and then a few brokerages, I think Colliers and Orange County and San Diego. Then I came up to LA and interviewed at the same shops, a couple of firms. It went well. And I got this call from my aunt maybe 2 weeks before I was coming down to drive down here. And she said, hey, you know what? I have this friend, and her son is at this smaller brokerage shop, really likes it, really likes the culture, thinks, it might be a good fit for you. You should connect with him. And so I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? So I caught on the phone with him, talked to him about it. He's like, yeah, dude, send me your resume, come in. Like, we'd love to have you. I think you'd be a good fit. So long story short, I'm in LA. I driven down from Sacramento. This is a 7-hour drive. I am about to go home. I sent him my resume on Thursday. Weekend goes, it's Monday, and I'm about to drive home. And I hadn't heard back from him. And I was like, fuck, dude, can I curse on this?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I was like, fuck. Like, I haven't heard back. Like, if they tell me, hey, come in for an interview, I'm on my way back to Sacramento. I'm not driving 7 hours back down. So I just said, F it. And I knew where the office was. I drove to the office. I had my suit on, went in the front door, and the reception was there. And I was like, hey, I'm here for an interview. And she was like, okay, give me a second. So she got two people, Jeff Miller and Charles Wright, who interviewed me, and ended up going well. The next day, they sent me an email. Hey, we'd like to offer you a job to come down and work full time. And in 2 weeks, the summer training class was starting. So, I was like, let's go. Sweet. First job, to circle it back around, Alabama was the first school I got into. Decided to go there. This job was the first job I got offered. I decided to come here. So I guess I'm a man of firsts. But ended up, moved down into a house of like 8 adults, 40-year-olds that just rented a room. It was really spur of the moment, and lived in that for like 6 months until I got a couple guys at the office to live with me. But yeah, that's how I kind of got to where I am today at Matthews, and still at the same company.
Love it. No. And in terms of when you joined, so you mentioned, you're kind of like this 2018, 2019 timeframe. So was that when you joined? So last 3-4 years or so?
Yeah. Summer 2018 is when I started the summer training class, and then I got on the phones August of 2018.
Got it. Yeah. So let's talk about the early days in terms of building the base of your business, right? I think I was licensed for a period of time. I stopped practicing on the brokerage side, and I just went full time into growing our quote unquote private equity real estate business, going out there raising money, buying deals, and that's really where I started to focus. But I think that there's oftentimes a misconception out there in terms of somebody who wants to get into the brokerage game, and then in terms of when they think they're going to start making money and how long it actually takes really to start to make even a median income, right? And then to really get to the point where you're making great money. Talk about your first 12 months in the business, first 18 months, or however long you want to define that, and talk about what that looked like on a day-to-day in terms of actually getting off the ground there.
Yeah. So this is my favorite thing to talk about when I'm interviewing some agents or some young people to come and work at the company, because I think it just kind of weeds out the people who just wouldn't necessarily be a good fit for us. So for me, first 12 months, I made $0. And that was a combination of multifamily LA, extremely competitive, was in a new market. The mentor that I had been doing the market below me, so I didn't really know anyone there, which wasn't an issue necessarily, but I was starting from the ground zero. They gave me a phone, gave me a database, which I was very thankful for, and said, hey, start ripping. So 6 months go by, and the first deal I actually got, which I sell multifamily properties. The first deal that I got was a referral from one of my mentors in Sacramento. He had a lawyer friend who had a client who owned a vet clinic in Simi Valley, California. And, here's me, like, made zero money, living. Thankfully, my parents gave me like a couple grand to live off of a month, which was mostly used for rent. And I was basically floated, and I was going to pay him back. And so I'm like, yes, I'll take on anything. Yeah. And the unique situation about it was, typically I wouldn't recommend this to any agent. And my mentor was like, yeah, we don't really do that. Like, let's refer it out. The unique situation about this one was the tenant was just trying to buy it from the landlord. So I was basically negotiating the tenant buying it from the landlord, which was pretty sweet. And they were going to pay us for it. And I was like, can we do this? And my mentor told me, he goes, yeah, I think we can do this. So we, long story short, we go back and forth, negotiate it. And we ended up closing that deal, I think maybe like 8 months into the business for me. So I never listed it, was never on market, never did anything. But from that, I got a check. I think $10,000 was the money that I had made from that deal. And to me, that was like, holy shit. Like,
because it becomes real. It becomes real,
Yeah. Like I this is a real job. I could survive on 6 months off of that $10,000. I was literally like, my dinner was protein shakes. That's all I ate. Just one big ass protein shake. So long story short, that ended up going through. And I think around month 7 or 8, maybe month 6, I got this really big listing. Or I got this really big pitch, and I brought in like the whole team. We were preparing, and at the time I hadn't really pitched on a lot of deals. I hadn't known what to expect. This deal happened to be a 48 unit property in Koreatown, 520 South Mariposa. And the value of that building was like $9.3 million. And so for me, my first deal, I was like, okay, cool. Like, is this typical? Like, is this what is supposed to happen? And
Now it's a big boy one.
yeah, right. They're like, yeah, sure. Like, we'll roll with it. So, long story short, had the pitch in here. Our CEO at the time was still in the office in this El Segundo office that I was at. And I was like, Kyle, like, you got to come in here, like, pitch the deal. We're competing against this Marcus broker who's been in the business for 30 years. Like, we really, really need you to come in and help. And so fortunately he did, and he brought out this whiteboard, and I still remember it vividly. We walked in, the owner, she sat down. It was me, my partner, and then our CEO came in like a couple minutes later. He's like, hey, how you doing? You end up doing the whole pitch. He brought out this whiteboard and literally like wrote down Matthew's thesis, the company that I'm at, of like what makes us different and all this stuff. And he crushed it. And dude is a legend, but he crushed the pitch, and we ended up winning the listing. And we ended up selling that. And, you know, the person who bought that had already offered on the building with another broker, like before we listed it, at 8.5 million, I believe. And so we listed it, brought it out at 9.4, and immediately they came up and offered 9,240, which we ended up closing on. So we made that woman like $500,000 almost immediately, which for me was perfect case study to use on every other deal that I work on and pitch on, of the value of representation. But that was the first deal, and that escrow took 6 months. So I literally, from the time I listed that till closing, took over 6 months, which a year. And I got that check like August 4th or August 10th, one of those times around my birthday. It was around like $50,000. And that was where I was like hooked. This is my job. This is my career. I love this. Like, let's keep going. And ever since then, the ball kept rolling. To answer your question, I guess too, in terms of what activity I was doing when I was first starting out, it was 500 to 600 cold calls a week, in the office 7 days a week, from 5 a.m. till 8 o'clock at night. Like, that was the schedule for 18 months. That's what I did. And there was another agent who now runs our San Diego office. His name's Keegan Mulcahy. And me and him would like compete on who could get in the office earlier. So one day he would beat me and get in earlier, and then I would get him the next day, and we would just go back and forth and just play this game of like, who's going to get in, who's going to sleep less, basically, which, looking back at it, wasn't necessarily the smartest thing to do, but we were young and it was fun. So we did that whole thing, and it was just a grind, but I loved it. The culture here, everyone's in before 6 o'clock, everyone's staying late. And that's really what I think helped fuel those beginning years for me, was just because everyone was like me. They were struggling just like me. They were feeling it. And then we had people to look up to success. There's almost like this distortion field around the office and the company that I'm at, because people are upset when they make $200,000. Like, that is a bad year because everyone's doing really well. Mm-hmm. And it helps fuel the energy and you pushing yourself and wanting to get better and better and better. And I think that was super helpful in the beginning for me, when I was making 600 calls a week, staying late, getting up early, and just getting after it.
No, I love it. And, I think that's the common thread between all of the successful brokers that I know or either work with or have spoken to or are aware of, is a relentless grind to get the plane off the ground, right? Maybe once you're year 3, year 5, you have some great relationships with some folks in your local network and in your market. And, the listing, you start to get some referrals and people start to come to you a little bit more. And it's not requiring that same volume of the sheer volume of activity, but it takes a while to swing the pendulum in that direction. So, in terms of making 500 to 600 cold calls a week, is that to owners just introducing yourself, trying to build a high level relationship, trying to get to a point where you put together like a BOV for them or something like that, and just to build that list? Is that your end game when you're doing something like that in the beginning?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it's funny when I look back at my pitch, it was like, hey, This is Taylor Avakian over here at Matthews. We just evaluated this building down the street. Do you want to sell? Like I was
Just
just
doing
like,
that
do you
over
want
and
to
over and
sell?
over,
Do you
right?
want
Yeah.
yeah, over and over and over. And because I just like didn't know what else to do. That's not true. But I felt like I want to get either tell me you're going to sell or not, and I'm going to figure it out from there. And like a pit bull on a tire, we're going to go after it. But that was me. I was building, trying to uncover proposals, and what they preach here, and what I tell younger brokers too, is you make the calls, you present the proposals, you go on the meetings. If you do that consistently, week over week, there is no doubt in my mind that you will not make it in this business. Zero doubt in my mind, because the basics done over and over again consistently is what makes and separates the brokers, the mediocre brokers, from the really great brokers. And there's, maybe edges here and there. Like there's a lot of brokers I know who are almost borderline geniuses. They just happen to go in the brokerage business and they can remember comps off the top of their head and they can do math really quickly. That wasn't me. But I just had this like undeniable will to succeed and to win. And I was willing to do whatever it took to get there. And that included calling these owners and, trying to get proposals and BOVs and meet with them and push for all that stuff and, learn the business from the ground up.
No, that's great. And, this is, I should have asked you this after you discuss, closing that big deal in Koreatown and the economics around it. So I'm not going to ask you how much money you made on it, right? Because I don't think that's not necessarily where I'm going with this.
Sure.
But I think there's oftentimes a misconception amongst, investors who are hiring brokers, right? They see the 4, 5, 6%, whatever the broker's charging them to sell that property, but they don't necessarily understand what happens with that commission, right? And you have typically a team of brokers, and then you have somebody who's underneath a broker, right? And there's some splits behind the scenes. Can you talk about the economics within an organization similar to Matthews, whether you use Matthews or a different company?
Sure.
But just talking about what actually happens when that commission gets paid at closing, because I actually think that many investors don't really know where that money goes. They think it just goes right into, a broker's pocket.
Yeah, for sure. So, I can only speak for what I've heard in some of the other company structures and just a general thesis or general basis of what most brokerage shops is. But how it works is you have a split with the house. You as an agent have a split with the house. And let's just say you're not on a team, for instance, you're just a solo broker. So whatever commission the company earns, because you as an agent, you're working for the company, but the commission is paid from the sale to the company. So they get that money and then they split it based upon your agreement with the house. So whatever that looks like, at some of the bigger shops, it's like 50-50. Some of the smaller shops, if you're a Remax or a Keller Williams or something like that, it could be 80-20 or 90-10, some instances. And so it gets split up that way. And then if you have team members on the team who you're working with and stuff like that, then determining on the agreement that you have with those team members, then it's split up by the percentage, whatever is agreed upon in those terms. So if you have 2 people on the deal and you get $100,000, you're just getting a third of that. So you're getting 33,000. And then your split with the house is 50-50. You're coming away with 15 grand of $100,000 check. It's like, it's not as glamorous and as fruitful when you're doing all these deals as a lot of people think, a lot of, principals think.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's why I ask, because I think it's interesting just how misinterpreted that part of the business is, because it's somewhat opaque, right? It's like, all right, I'm paying insert brokerage this amount of money. I just assume the guy that I'm working with is making that money, right? But there's all kinds of different nuance. So something interesting that I'm sure somebody listening will have learned something new with that, which is the goal there. Now, you did 500-600 cold calls for 18 months, right? Get the ship off the ground, try and get your feet under you. How do you grow the business beyond just the sheer volume in terms of like, do you do anything on an ongoing basis to continue bringing value to clients that you have some level of a relationship with? Is there something that you would recommend to brokers to be a better service provider to the folks that they are working with? Assuming that, hey, like they're getting the reps in, right? They're making the calls, they're trying to get it off the ground. that's to get, to open the door. But once the door is open and you're trying to build that relationship over a multi-year period of time and to be that go-to person for the folks in their world, do you have any tips for folks, I should say brokers in that field, or just anything you'd like to share in terms of how you've built your business at that level?
Yeah, great question. I would say information. We're in the information business because and it's gotten a lot harder to find information that's not as readily available to the public just because of how much data there is out in the world. But providing clients with pieces of information that directly affect the value of their property, whether that's rent comps, whether that's sales comps, whether that's new laws that are coming into play, whether that's new resident manager laws that are going to be affecting how much they have to pay their resident manager or how much they can only credit them. Like things like that directly impact the wallet of an owner, I think is something that any broker should understand and learn and work to understand, because that information is what you can communicate and add value to someone. And they always say, like, add value. Great term, of course. But what is that value going to do for an owner? What actual value is it going to do in terms of changing their significance, whether it's saving them time, saving them money, saving them headache, whatever that may be? What are you going to be doing to add that? And in the beginning, I remember I just sat down with like a pen and paper and wrote down, like, why am I valuable? What are the things that I can do to provide that owner valuable? And came up with a list of 50 things, and then started crossing out what I thought was more valuable than others, and came down to a couple. And so I focused really heavily on constantly updating people through emails or phone calls, or even recently, which I wish I would have done earlier, the social stuff, adding value through social media and putting your knowledge out there. And in the beginning, you don't know as much, but you can still interact. Like, you can still be a part of the community, and kind of go along your journey, but adding value through that way. And for me, it was through the emails, the calls, the thought leadership pieces, stuff like that. I think that's what has continued to put me in front of someone in terms of top of mind, which any broker, they just want to be top of mind.
100%. Yeah. And it's funny because I know the guys locally who, who I think of the most quickly when I think about brokers that are operating in my local market, the greater Boston area, the Southern New Hampshire area. They're the folks that are like, hey, just so you know, we just put this property under contract at this price. I know you own the one down the street. I bet you didn't think that you could actually lock this up for that. And then,
Mm-hmm.
now I'm thinking about it, right? I wasn't a seller before, but now I'm thinking about it. Or, hey, this big owner is liquidating a lot of their assets, or, this owner just did a refi and this was his appraised value. Maybe you should go and refi, even if it's not leading to business, right? I think that's obviously a real core component of somebody that's doing well as a broker, right? And building those great relationships. So now I'm going to come at it from a different angle, right? Let's put ourselves in the investor shoe, right? A guy like myself, or a lot of the folks who are listening. What makes a good client to a broker, right? In terms of, I'm sure you got plenty of owners reaching out to you. Hey, you got any deals? Can you get me on your list? Can you keep me top of mind in case you find anything that fits my criteria? What are some things that investors can do to build good relationships with brokers, to stand out to brokers, to really help, increase the chance that they are the ones that are top of mind with the brokers doing the business?
Yeah, that is something that I love to talk about, because it's funny. When you get on the phone with investors and principals and stuff, and they don't know your name, right? And they're buyers, but they're willing to talk to a broker. They're like, bring me a deal. Like, hey, bring me a deal and then we'll do some business. And I'm like, why don't you sell a deal with me? Like, you want to sell it? I know you got to sell some deals. Like, let's sell a deal. And it's almost that chicken or the egg, which one first? Definitely, if you bring someone a deal, like, there's that level of reciprocity involved. And I feel like a lot of people would say that was so. But also, being a good principal, for me at least, when I go and I'm talking about deals and I'm showing them an opportunity, quick feedback is always appreciated, even if it's like, hey, not for me, thanks for taking a look. Constant communication. If they're reaching out to me in the beginning, I was building my book of buyers and trying to figure out, who was buying what and all of this, and look at the comps. And if you're on the comps, then I would give you a call and talk to you. So if you're on the comps, definitely helpful, because that's what I do even today. I'm calling people who bought recently around there and seeing if they have any interest in this deal. But in terms of being able to stay in communication with brokers, it's like giving them quick feedback. It's telling them about maybe some information that could help them in their conversations, or the rents that you were getting here, providing value to them almost. Because I always say the best deals that you find, typically, if it's from a broker, are off market, and it's from like a relationship that you built. They came to you first for some reason. So treat that relationship like you're trying to build anything else. Add value to them. Be useful, be helpful, like be that guy who, or gal who is just a good person and is fun to talk to and is friendly, and pick up the phone, or when you can't talk, hey, I'm busy, but I'll get back to you. I'll call you back. Follow, like if they leave you a voicemail, call them back. Just staying top of mind, and I think is just as important as being responsive and being easy to work with when you actually get in the deal, or being upfront about, hey, there's an issue with this. Like I'm going to ask for a retrade, or, I'm happy to write an offer here, but I definitely have to take some off. Like, let's work on this together. Or, this is it. I'm buying it at this price. You have my word. You keep your word. That is what really matters to me when I'm working with a buyer and the relationships that I'm working to build with anyone who wants to buy my deals.
No, that's all great. I in our business, right, we try to make a goal of just being easy to communicate with, right? We want to respond quickly to brokers. We want to provide some level of valuable insight in terms of, we get sent a deal that's, that maybe doesn't work for us, but can we provide some feedback that's helpful to that individual in terms of if they're speaking with other buyers, or if they're speaking with the seller, or whatever, right? Yeah. So a question for you, because that's just one way that we think about trying to build those good relationships amongst a lot of the things that you just mentioned. Do you have maybe a suggestion for folks, or some level of expectation with folks that you're taking deals to, in terms of, how quickly you'd like people to respond, the type of feedback that you like to receive when you're taking deals out? Just in terms of, if we're thinking about investors being able to separate themselves from the pack in that respect, because I almost think it's an art form, right? There's a lot of buyers who are just, you can only tell the broker maybe so many times that maybe a deal doesn't work for them, and still provide something that's helpful and valuable along the way. I don't know if that question makes any sense. So I might have worded that in a weird way, but I would love your thoughts on that.
I think I know what you're asking. Yeah. So for the way that I think about it is, what can help me if I'm listing a property? What can give me ammo to go to bat for you as a buyer? Like, what about this building exactly can I go to my seller and say, hey, look, the windows on this building all need to be replaced. That's minimum going to cost $15,000, right? Like any buyer who comes to the table, they're going to notice the windows that need to be replaced, or the soft story retrofit work. Like, you're giving me your bid. Hey, we got a bid for this just down the street. Same thing. Or have my guy come out and take a look. It's going to cost a minimum of $65,000. Like, that ammo that I can use to go and work on your behalf, even if you're not the right buyer. If you do me a solid and give me information that I can negotiate with other people, or if I get a quote from you and this other buyer comes to me and says it's going to be 100,000, and I got a quote from you saying it's 50, I'm going to go, I don't think so. I appreciate it. See what you're doing here. Like, it's not $100,000. I got this other guy who's got it. Like, if you're in the game, we're playing this together, you're much more likely to get those deals, the really good ones, at least, that you have interest, or that I dig up off market, or that I think would be a good fit for you. And just giving me ammo, basically. Does that make sense?
No, it makes great sense. Yeah. It's like, give me some actual hard pieces of information that help you tell your story, or help make your case, I guess make your case in quotations here, as it relates to why this deal should be priced at this number instead of the price that it's currently being priced.
What is your
market at,
underwriting look at? How are you underwriting the deal? What does
Yeah.
your expenses ratios look like? What is your reserves looking like? All those little details that can differ from one buyer to the next, or my underwriting to your underwriting, that will help me at least be able to give you maybe some answer some questions that you have, or get on the same page of like, okay, I can see where you're coming from this. I get it now. Right?
Yeah.
Let's be on the same side of the table at a certain point if we're going to be working together now and in the future. Yeah.
No, that's great. No, and that is certainly very helpful, because I think a lot of people are just like, hey, too expensive, right? A little too pricey. We're probably not going to work for us right now. But there's nothing to really work with there, right? You get into like, hey, those insurance figures look a little light. That's top of mind for me because we do deals in Florida, and I feel like every single broker deal, I'm like, hey man, our quotes are 30-40% higher than that. Yeah. So, but I think that's great advice, is get a little bit more granular, provide something that's hard and actionable for that broker to go speak with the seller about. Now, in terms of obviously you're spending probably the majority of your week on the brokerage side of the business. Do you do anything personally from an investing standpoint? Are you buying as well, investing as well, or are you 100% brokerage?
So I'm 99.99% brokerage at this point in time. And for me, it's just, I understand the value of investing, and I know that I want to invest in real estate just because I see my clients and I like what they're doing. And it's, to me, you're not necessarily building equity in a brokerage business. The way that I'm positioned, at least, I can't sell my book of business. There's nothing for me to sell. So I'm not building equity. What I can build is relationship capital. And with that relationship capital comes opportunities that I can invest my commissions, my day job, into projects that are going to build equity over time. And through that, typically what I do is I'll invest as either a LP or sometimes a co-GP with some of my best clients, and invest in deals, small pieces, nothing huge. And I've done that on a couple deals here and there, but I try not to compete with my clients in the areas that I do business. If I was buying properties in Louisville and, I had a good relationship there and was doing that, like, I think that's totally cool. If I'm buying properties in Los Angeles where I'm selling property and a buyer gets a deal from me and they know that I buy deals, and they ask themselves, wait, why didn't you buy it? Like, what's wrong with this deal for you not to buy it? Right. That kind of puts a little cloud over you as a broker. And I know there's many brokers who are successful at doing that. A long time ago, you could get away with that a little bit easier when information was a little bit easier to hide. And I know the brokers in the business right now who have that reputation, and you can still be a successful broker doing that. It's just not something that I want to do. And I also feel like if I invest in deals, honestly, if they don't sell that with me, dude, you ain't getting another deal from me. Come on, come on, man.
Yeah.
Like we're on the same team now. I'm gonna save you guys some capital. I'm gonna give you a sweetheart deal on the fee.
Yeah, you're incentivized because you're literally invested in the deal. So
it's definitely. I think that's the way that I've approached the business, and I know the value and see the value of investing, and I really do love real estate. So I like seeing where value is and understanding how you can change the window size to get more rent and all this, weird stuff that principals think of. When my business flipped for the better when I started putting on my principal hat, when I started looking at deals as a principal and not as a broker. Because when you look at brokers' numbers all day, it doesn't make any sense. None of the brokers' pro forma numbers make any sense if you're a principal.
Yeah.
When you look at it from a principal's perspective, you can start to see like, okay, well, is that pro forma cap rate with any capex in the deal at all? And most of the time, no. So then you're going to get pro forma rents without doing any capex. Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? So understanding that, being able to have these conversations, being a little bit more sophisticated with the players, a little bit more credibility when I'm working with them. And if they got a deal, they know that I understand what's inside, what the issues are, how to talk over it, how to sell the deal, things like that. I think that's the way that I've approached investing in assets.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I assume that was the answer, because again, the best brokers that I know are typically just as a backhanded analogy, they're not shitting where they eat, right? Which is an aggressive way to describe this, but that creates a weird story in the marketplace around them. Because if they're prospecting and saying, all right, and then logistically too, if you're a broker who's prospecting while also trying to buy property, then your pitch to sellers is weird. Like, oh, I'd like to buy it. Oh, okay, actually, we couldn't come to a price. I can list it for you at a higher price than what I just offered you. Like, there's all kinds of weird Venn diagram overlap that makes it unclear in the marketplace as to what you do. And the most successful brokers I know locally, at least again around me, speaking anecdotally, are folks that if they do invest, they just invest in a separate geographical area, and they make a very clear distinction between, hey, I invest up here, but I broker over here, or they passively invest. And we have a broker in Florida that's passively invested in a couple of our deals, and yeah, it's in the market where he's transacting, but that's fine. And honestly, sometimes he says it makes even more sense because of the tax benefits, as a real estate professional. And, this isn't a tax. We're not getting into tax topics here on this show, but between bonus appreciation, cost seg, being a real estate professional, there's all advantages to investing passively versus buying, maybe smaller multifamily assets where it's trickier to access those tax benefits. So makes a lot of sense for sure.
I want to clarify too. I don't buy deals that I list. Only deals that are off market or other properties that other brokers are selling that my clients come to me and be like, hey, you're going to throw in some money. And those are the deals I invest in. I wouldn't invest in a property that I'm selling. That's
weird. Yeah, that's
just in my opinion.
Yeah. And that's a good distinction for sure. What's funny too is as a principal or a buyer, if you're raising capital for a deal and a local broker is investing in the deal, that's like the best talking point. It's like this individual who is extraordinarily plugged in and knows the market believes us enough to write a check, which is an aside, but it's a funny byproduct of that. All right, so we're coming up at the end of the show here. I want to make sure we get to you promoting your business, all of that, but I do want to ask a bit of a local question for you. A lot of the folks listening to this or Northeast based or Southeast, Southwest based, just by nature of my personal network and what I've done over the years. And, I think that there's all kinds of discourse online. You're very active on Twitter. That's how we came across each other. You had a lot of people on there buying multifamily in the Southeast, buying multifamily in the Southwest, less people buying in these markets where people are quote unquote leaving, or where the political climate isn't necessarily favorable. Like I live in Boston, which is similar to LA in a lot of these respects. What's the case for doing deals in LA or a market like Boston? Because whatever you say about LA is probably going to apply to where I'm at too. Why do deals here? Why invest here? How do you look at buying multifamily locally around you? And what are some of the reasons that folks that are successful do so?
Yeah, great question. And what I've seen, and this is something that I've come through over the years of brokering, because you start to understand the business better and how people do make money. And there is a barrier to entry in terms of knowledge and understanding of the local laws that really keep the buyer pool almost like a tight-knit community. So when outsiders come in to look at the market, they really don't know what they're doing. There's so many nuances that have to do with rent control laws and expenses and the way that certain districts are set up and how hard it is to develop and where the zoning is changing and things like that when you're boots on the ground, you have a competitive advantage. I think that other people who are not in this market just wouldn't be able to compete with. And the people who do a lot of deals here, one, they have a network, they know all the vendors and the brokers, and they have a reputation and name for themselves. They also have typically economies of scale where they have the management in place. They have a bunch of warehouses with a bunch of parts and pieces and stuff like that. So they can effectively run the deal at a lower cost expense, therefore increasing their NOI, which gives them a better return. And then when you own property for such a long time in LA, with California with Prop 13, your property taxes are artificially kept low. And so it kind of behooves you to pull money out if you're not going to be selling, pull money out and go and reinvest that locally in the neighborhood, because it then gives you more economies of scale. So it's kind of this like whirlwind, this flywheel effect once you start building your basis. And like if I was to come and buy a deal in Boston, and I bought something and you saw the deal and you'd be like, dude, that dude's an idiot. Like he's like, what? He paid that much for this? Like, and maybe I'm looking at it from an LA perspective and thinking, oh, dude, this is killer. Like it's a 6 cap and the basis is low on price per unit. And you're knowing that this brick needs to be reinforced in 2025 and like it's going to be $1 million, like all this stuff that an outsider wouldn't know. I think that's the case for wanting to come to a competitive market and a very highly regulated market like Los Angeles. And also the supply. It is really effing hard to build property in LA. It is really, really hard. They make it almost impossible. And so when they're not putting new supply into the system, it only makes your buildings and the buildings around you more valuable because the rents keep going up. People want to keep moving here. It's the best weather in the country. Like, let's not argue that's the truth.
Yeah, there's no arguing that. I don't know who's trying to make that case. Yeah.
So, that's the reason that I think people should invest in LA, or that's the reason that I think the successful people who do invest in LA are successful, is because they have that advantage.
And that makes a lot of sense, and I'll just harp on one piece of that and talk our book a little bit, right? Being around here in the Northeast, the nature of, LA, if you head farther south, San Diego, if you get into a lot of the coastal markets, either East, West Coast, the nature of them being so supply constrained is not oftentimes discussed in the wider commentary about markets. People love to talk about population growth, job growth, income growth, and all that stuff matters, right? Rent growth, that is all relevant. It does matter. That is important data to understand and measure and to know about the market that you're investing in. But people oftentimes conveniently leave out ease of adding supply to a market, right? And you look at Phoenix and all the major cities in Texas, and a lot of the cities in Florida. Just easy to build. Just the political climate is pro-development, which is good. It's good. It's good to build more housing, right? But from an investor standpoint, there can be risks there. There's oftentimes just more land to build. It's just easier to literally physically find land to build real estate. Developers come in and they want to capture all of that growth. So there's all this risk of overdevelopment and oversupply. And it's like, Boston, like you want to go build 20 units of housing, good luck, man. Spend the next couple of years of your life trying to do that. I'm sure it's the same in LA. And that is a really, really important dynamic, because if there's any growth whatsoever, oftentimes the demand or the supply lags behind it, right? So I find myself saying that a lot when I'm talking about, New England in general, Southern New Hampshire, Greater Boston, but it's certainly an interesting dynamic as well out there. Well, Taylor, this has been great. I want to make sure I get you out of here on time. If folks want to reach out, learn more about you, follow you on Twitter and learn more about, what you're doing on the brokerage side, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can check me out on Twitter, at Tave _. And if you just search my name, like all my Taylor Avakian, all my information is online. I tell people, if you want to reach out to me, just Google me and my phone number and email will be there. So like, it's not that hard to find me. But yeah, you can check that out on Twitter. I'm mostly there. LinkedIn, I've been posting some stuff there too. But anytime, any questions, anyone like that, I love talking to brokers. I love helping them. I love talking to principals, understand the business and investing. And just, I love that stuff. So yeah, anyone who wants to chat about it, definitely open.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, man. Appreciate the time.
Axel, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. If you learned something new during the show, please consider sharing this episode with a friend, family member, or business partner, or just leaving a rating and review, as it helps the show get noticed by more folks. Catch you next week.